The night my daughter-in-law handed me a cardboard box at Thanksgiving dinner and said, "You can pack your things after dessert," something inside my chest went completely still. Not broken, not shattered, just still. The entire dining room froze. The crystal glasses, the steam rising from the turkey, the flicker of candlelight reflecting off the silverware my late husband and I had collected over 40 years. Everything felt suspended, like the moment right before a judge delivers a verdict. I remember the exact smell in the air: sage stuffing, butter, cinnamon from the sweet potatoes, and humiliation. Eleanor, she continued smiling politely, as if she were discussing table settings. "We've decided it's time for you to move somewhere more appropriate for your stage of life." Her name was Rachel Whitmore, 42 years old, perfect blonde blowout, teeth that always showed too much when she smiled, the kind of woman who could insult you in a tone that sounded like charity. My son Daniel sat beside her, staring down at his plate, as if the cranberry sauce had suddenly become fascinating. He did not speak. That silence hurt more than her words. My granddaughter Lily, who was 16, stopped mid-bite. My grandson Owen, barely 12, looked between us with wide, frightened eyes. I placed my napkin on the table carefully. I remember thinking how steady my hands looked. After dessert, I asked calmly. Rachel slid the box toward me. Inside were my framed photos, my medication organizer, even the knitted shawl my sister had given me last Christmas. She had already packed my life. "You can't stay here anymore," she said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The house is too big, and frankly, you're not safe living independently. Not safe." The words echoed like a courtroom accusation. I had bought that house with the life insurance money after my husband Thomas died. 5 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a wide porch overlooking Lake Evergreen in Michigan. I had invited Daniel and Rachel to live there when their startup company struggled during the pandemic. I thought I was saving my family. Instead, I had been quietly replaced. Mom, Daniel finally murmured, still not meeting my eyes. "Rachel found a wonderful assisted living community. They have activities and medical staff." Activities? As if I were a bored child. In that moment, something sharp and cold slid into place inside me. Not anger, clarity. Because this wasn't sudden. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the final move in a long, deliberate campaign. Rachel had slowly pushed me out of my own life for 3 years, changing the locks on the home office, taking over financial accounts to help manage things, telling friends I was forgetful, moving my husband's portrait from the living room to a hallway corner. And Daniel had allowed it, always choosing peace with his wife over loyalty to his mother. I looked at him then, really looked. At 48, he suddenly seemed small. "You've already decided," I said quietly. Rachel nodded. "We think it's best." Best for whom? I didn't ask, because at that moment, I realized something neither of them understood. They did not own that house. Not truly. Years earlier, when Daniel begged me to refinance so he could secure a business loan, my attorney had insisted on a protective clause. The property would remain under my estate trust unless Daniel repaid a symbolic loan amount. He never had. I picked up my fork again and calmly resumed eating my dinner. Rachel blinked surprised. "You're not upset?" she asked. I smiled politely. "Oh, sweetheart," I said. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The table went silent. Daniel finally looked up confused. "What do you mean?" I took a sip of water and met Rachel's eyes. "I mean," I said softly, "that by Christmas, one of us will be moving out of this house. And it will not be me." I slept perfectly that night. Not a single tear, not a single moment of panic. Instead, I lay awake in my bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house I had built a life inside. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old oak floorboards, the distant waves from Lake Evergreen brushing against the shoreline. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd lost: control. At exactly 6 in this morning, I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened the locked drawer where I kept my most important documents. The trust agreement sat right on top. My victim, Eleanor Whitmore, age 68, primary owner. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal and remembered the conversation with my attorney, Gregory Hale, nearly 8 years ago. "Mrs. Whitmore," he had said, leaning forward across his mahogany desk, "family dynamics can change. This clause protects you." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I understood he had been quietly saving my future. Because legally, Daniel and Rachel were not homeowners. They were occupants, and they owed me $200,000 in outstanding loan value tied to the property transfer. I closed the folder slowly. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. At breakfast, Rachel entered the kitchen, wearing silk pajamas, her phone already in hand. She paused when she saw me reading documents. "You're up early," she said, casual but wary. "I've always been an early riser," I replied. She poured herself coffee without offering me a small habit that had grown into a symbol of everything between us. "I scheduled a tour at Silver Pines. Assisted living," she said brightly. "It's lovely. You'll have friends your age." My age, as if age erased ownership, erased dignity, erased history. I looked at her calmly. "That won't be necessary." She laughed lightly. "Eleanor, let's not make this difficult." Before I could answer, Daniel entered, already dressed for work. He looked exhausted. "Mom," he said gently, "we just want what's best for you." I nodded slowly. "I agree," I said. Both of them visibly relaxed. And that was when I delivered the first move. "So this afternoon," I continued, "I have a meeting with Gregory Hale to discuss transferring full property control back into my personal estate." Rachel froze. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, back?" I met his eyes steadily. "I mean exactly what I said. The house remains legally under my trust. You never completed the repayment clause." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she whispered. "It is," I replied calmly. Daniel shook his head. "Mom, we've lived here for years. We renovated. We pay the utilities. And I allowed you to," I said gently, "because you were my family." The word allowed hung in the air. Rachel's voice rose sharp now. "Are you threatening us?" I folded my hands. "No," I said. "I'm correcting you." Daniel looked stunned. "Mom, you wouldn't actually make us leave." I held his gaze. "For 3 years," I said quietly, "you watched your wife erase me from my own life." His eyes filled with shame. "And last night," I continued, "you both handed me a box and told me to disappear." Rachel opened her mouth to argue. I raised my hand calmly. "You wanted me excluded," I said softly. "You wanted control." I leaned back in my chair. "Well, I finished. Now you're going to learn what exclusion really feels like." And for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, Rachel looked afraid. Rachel's fear didn't explode immediately. It crept in slowly, like a crack spreading through glass. At first she tried to laugh it off. "Oh, please," she said later that morning, pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. "She's bluffing. It's just emotional manipulation." I was in the adjoining sitting room, watering my plants. I could hear every word. "She's old," Rachel continued, lowering her voice. "She probably doesn't even understand the paperwork." I smiled faintly. That assumption had always been her greatest weakness, underestimating me. For years, she had treated me like decorative furniture, a quiet grandmother who baked cookies and stayed out of adult decisions. She never once considered that before I became a grandmother, I had been a businesswoman. Before Daniel was born, I had helped build a regional accounting firm from the ground up. I understood contracts, ownership structures, leverage. I understood power. By mid-afternoon, Daniel came home early from work. That alone told me everything. He walked into the living room with the pale, shaken look of someone who had just heard a truth they couldn't deny. "Mom," he said quietly, "I spoke to our attorney." I looked up from my book, and his throat tightened. "The house is still legally yours." Rachel, standing behind him, went rigid. "That's impossible," she snapped. "We signed documents years ago." I folded my hands calmly. "You signed occupancy and conditional transfer agreements," I said, "not ownership release." Daniel sank into a chair, as if his knees could no longer support him. "But we invested so much," he whispered. "Renovations," I agreed softly. "Decor, landscaping." I held his gaze. "But not repayment." Rachel's composure finally cracked. "This is insane," she shouted. "You're trying to steal our home." I stood slowly. "No, Rachel," I said, my voice steady. "You tried to steal mine." The room fell silent. For a moment, I saw something flicker across Daniel's face. Not anger, recognition. Because deep down, he knew it was true. Rachel began pacing again faster, now her voice rising. "You're doing this out of spite, over a stupid Thanksgiving misunderstanding." I shook my head gently. "This didn't begin at Thanksgiving," I said. "It began the first time you told guests I was just staying temporarily." Her mouth snapped shut. It continued. "I went on calmly when you changed the banking passwords without telling me, when you moved Thomas's photo, when you told Lily I was forgetful, so she shouldn't rely on me." Rachel's face flushed crimson. Daniel looked stunned. "You said that," he whispered. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth sat in the air, like a weight no one could move. I stepped closer to them. "For 3 years," I said quietly, "I allowed it, because I believed family mattered more than pride." I paused, but last night, when you packed my belongings into a box, you ended that illusion. Rachel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "So what now?" I met her eyes. "Now," I said calmly, "your repayment deadline begins." Daniel swallowed. "How long?" 30 days. Rachel gasped. "That's impossible." "Yes," I agreed softly. "It is." And that was the moment she finally understood. She had not been negotiating with a powerless old woman. She had just triggered a legal countdown she could not stop. The house changed overnight. Not physically, but emotionally. Tension seeped into every corner like cold air through broken windows. Rachel stopped speaking to me entirely. She moved through the halls with tight shoulders and sharp footsteps, as if my very presence offended her. Daniel became quiet in a different way. Guilt weighed on him. I could see it in the way he avoided eye contact, in how he lingered outside my room, as if wanting to say something, then walking away instead. But the biggest change came from the children. Lily approached me first. It happened 2 days after the confrontation. I was in the sunroom, pruning my orchids, when she slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. "Grandma," she said in a small voice, "are we really going to lose the house?" I looked at her carefully. At 16, she was old enough to understand truth, but still young enough to feel its full emotional weight. "I'm not taking anything from you," I said gently. "I'm protecting what was already mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "Mom says you're trying to destroy the family." I felt a quiet ache in my chest. "That isn't true," I said softly. "Then why are you doing this?" she whispered. I reached for her hand. "Because sometimes," I said, "when people treat you like you don't matter, you have to show them that you do." She stared at me, absorbing that. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "I think Mom has been mean to you," she admitted. "The honesty of children is both beautiful and devastating." "I don't want you to leave," she added, her voice breaking. I pulled her into an embrace. "I'm not leaving," I whispered. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt tears sting my eyes. That evening, Daniel knocked on my door. He stood there for a long moment before speaking. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten." I studied him. "You didn't want to see," I replied gently. He nodded. "I thought keeping peace was protecting the family." His voice cracked. "But I was just protecting myself from conflict." That admission mattered more than any apology. "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered. I placed my hand over his. "I know," I said, "but not choosing is still a choice." He lowered his head. "What happens if we can't pay?" he asked. I answered calmly. "Then ownership returns fully to me." He swallowed hard. "And we'll have to move." "Yes." The silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Is there any way to fix this?" I met his eyes. "That depends," I said softly. "On what?" "On whether your family wants reconciliation or just comfort." He looked confused. I leaned back in my chair. "Because if you only want the house," I said quietly, "you've already lost me." And as he stood there unable to answer, I realized something with perfect clarity. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about whether my son was willing to choose justice over convenience. And that decision would determine everything that came next. The first official letter arrived on a gray Monday morning. Certified mail, signature required. I signed for it myself at the front door, while Rachel watched from the hallway. Her arms crossed so tightly they looked like armor. She knew what it was before I even opened it. The formal notice of repayment demand. 30 days, $200,000, or full property reversion to my trust. Her face went pale as the postal carrier walked away. "This is harassment," she muttered. I said nothing, because the truth is, the letter didn't feel like revenge. It felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. Later that day, I overheard Rachel on the phone in the kitchen, her voice sharp and frantic. "Daniel, we need to call another lawyer. There has to be a loophole." Pause. "No, I don't care what the last one said. We can't just let her take everything." Another pause. Then, her voice dropped into something brittle and desperate. "This is our home." I sat in the living room, staring at the photograph of Thomas on the mantel. Our home. The irony almost made me laugh. That evening, Daniel returned from work, looking exhausted, like someone who had aged 5 years in a single day. "We spoke to a real estate attorney," he said quietly. I nodded, and he hesitated. "There's no way around the clause." Rachel slammed a cabinet door behind him. "This is unbelievable," she snapped. "You're just going to accept this." Daniel turned toward her, his expression strained. "It's legal, Rachel." Her eyes flashed. "So you're taking her side?" "No," he said tiredly. "I'm facing reality." For the first time, I saw fear crack through Rachel's polished exterior. Not just fear of losing the house, fear of losing control. For years, she had shaped the narrative inside this family, defined what was true, who was right, who was reasonable. Now that control was slipping, and she didn't know how to function without it. The tension escalated quickly after that. Rachel began trying a new strategy. Charm. 2 days later, she knocked on my bedroom door, carrying a cup of tea. "I thought you might like chamomile," she said softly. The sudden sweetness was almost surreal. I accepted the cup, but didn't drink it. She sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped. "Eleanor," she began, carefully, "we've had misunderstandings, but we're family. Surely we can find a compromise." I watched her quietly. This was the first time in years she had used my name without an edge. "What kind of compromise?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "You could transfer ownership back to Daniel," she said. "We could sign a lifetime residency agreement for you." There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, just a rearrangement of power. "You mean," I said calmly, "I stay here as a guest in my own house?" Her smile tightened. "That's not what I mean," but it was exactly what she meant. I set the teacup aside. "Rachel," I said gently, "you're negotiating terms. I'm waiting for acknowledgement." Her composure cracked again. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "How long are you going to punish us?" I met her eyes steadily. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm allowing consequences." She stood abruptly. "You're destroying this family." I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "You did that the moment you packed my life into a box." And as she stormed out of the room, I knew something important. Rachel still didn't understand. She believed this was about a house. She had no idea it was about dignity. The real turning point came from an unexpected place. Owen. It happened one quiet Saturday afternoon. I was in the garden, trimming the rose bushes Thomas had planted decades ago, when I heard small footsteps behind me. Grandma! I turned to see him standing there, clutching his baseball cap in both hands. His eyes looked older than a 12-year-old's should. "Can we talk?" he asked. I set my shears down immediately. "Of course, sweetheart." We sat together on the wooden bench near the lake, the wind carrying the faint scent of pine and water. He was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. "Mom cries at night," he said quietly. The words hit me like a stone. I said nothing. "She thinks we don't hear," he continued, "but Lily and I do." He swallowed hard. "She says it's all her fault, that she ruined everything." Pain twisted inside my chest. Not for Rachel, but for the children caught in the aftermath of adult choices. "I don't want us to move," he whispered. "I don't want everyone to hate each other." I reached for his hand. "No one hates anyone," I said softly. He looked up at me with startling seriousness. "Then why does it feel like we're breaking?" "Children see truth more clearly than adults ever do, because they don't hide behind pride." I took a deep breath. "Owen," I said gently, "sometimes families break because people stop respecting each other, and the only way to fix that is for someone to draw a line." He thought about that, then asked the question I had been dreading. "Are you trying to teach Mom a lesson?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He nodded slowly, too. "Dad says you're right," he admitted. My heart skipped. "What did he say exactly?" I asked quietly. Owen looked down at his hands. "He said he should have protected you, and that he's ashamed he didn't." Emotion surged unexpectedly in my throat. For years, I had waited to hear those words. Not from a child, but from my son. Grandma, Owen said softly, "Are you going to forgive Mom?" I looked out at the lake, its surface calm and endless. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "What has to happen?" he asked. I turned back to him. "She has to understand why what she did hurt," I said. "Not just feel sorry, because things went wrong." He nodded again, absorbing it like a quiet promise. Before he left, he hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you didn't leave," he whispered. After he ran back toward the house, I remained on the bench for a long time, watching the water, thinking, because for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something shift inside me. Not weakness, not doubt, but awareness. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a moral crossroads for our entire family. And I knew with absolute certainty that the hardest confrontation was still coming. Rachel hadn't truly faced herself yet, but she would, very soon. The confrontation finally came on a cold December night, 3 weeks into the repayment deadline. Snow had started falling just after sunset, covering Lake Evergreen in a thin, shimmering layer of white. The house felt quieter than usual, as if even the walls sensed something inevitable was approaching. I was sitting in the living room reading when Rachel walked in without knocking. That alone told me everything. For years, she had always knocked before entering when she was angry. It was her way of maintaining control of staging every interaction. Tonight, she came in like a storm. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged, her hair pulled into a careless knot instead of its usual perfect style. She looked human, and that frightened her more than anything. "We can't get the money," she said immediately. No greeting, no politeness, just truth. I closed my book slowly. "I know," I said. Her voice rose, trembling. "We tried everything. Loans, refinancing, asking my parents. No one can help." I studied her quietly. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't look like someone in control. She looked like someone who had run out of defenses. "You planned this," she accused suddenly. "You waited until we depended on this house, until we couldn't leave." I shook my head. "No," I said calmly. "You planned something. You planned to remove me." The words hung between us. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Then something inside her cracked. "You think I'm a monster," she whispered. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was more complicated. I think I said carefully, "You convinced yourself I didn't matter." Her lips trembled. "That's not true." I held her gaze. "Then why did you pack my belongings before even speaking to me?" I asked softly. She had no answer, only silence. And in that silence, the truth grew louder than any accusation. Rachel sank into the armchair across from me. "I felt like I was drowning," she admitted after a long moment. "Your presence, it made me feel like I could never be in charge of my own life." The honesty startled me. "I spent years trying to prove I was a good wife, a good mother," she continued, "but you were always there reminding everyone of a time when Daniel didn't need me." Her voice broke. "I thought if you were gone, I would finally feel secure." There it was. Not cruelty, insecurity, fear, misguided, destructive fear. "And now," I asked gently. She laughed bitterly. "Now I realize I wasn't fighting you," she said. "I was fighting my own insecurity, and I destroyed everything." The room fell quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then she said something that changed everything. "I'm not asking you to stop the eviction," she whispered. "I just need to know if there's any way to fix us. Us. Not the house, not the money, the relationship." For the first time, Rachel wasn't negotiating power. She was confronting herself. And that was the moment I had been waiting for. 3 days before Christmas, Daniel asked me to meet him alone. He chose the old lakeside pier behind the house, a place filled with memories from his childhood, the place where Thomas had taught him to fish, where we had celebrated birthdays and watched fireworks on summer nights. He stood there when I arrived, hands shoved into his coat pockets, staring at the frozen water. "Mom," he said quietly. When I approached, "I need to tell you something." I waited. He took a deep breath. "I failed you." The words came out raw, unfiltered. "For years I convinced myself I was keeping peace," he continued. "But really, I was afraid to stand up to Rachel." He looked at me, then his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dad would never have allowed anyone to treat you like that." The mention of Thomas tightened something inside my chest. "No," I said softly. "He wouldn't have." Daniel's voice cracked. "I became someone he wouldn't respect." Silence stretched between us, heavy and painful. "I don't care about the house anymore," he said finally. "I just want to fix what I broke." Those words mattered more than anything else he could have said, because they weren't about property. They were about accountability. I studied him carefully. "Fixing something doesn't mean returning to how it was," I said. "I know," he replied immediately. "I just want the chance to rebuild the right way." I nodded slowly, and then I told him the truth he needed to hear. "You can't rebuild a relationship without boundaries," I said. He swallowed. "I understand." "Then, listen carefully," I continued. "If I stay in this house, it will never again be as a tolerated guest." He nodded. "You will defend me if I am disrespected." "Yes, and Rachel must acknowledge not privately, but openly, that what she did was wrong." He hesitated only a second. "She will," he said, "because she already has." I felt something shift inside me at those words. Not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. As we stood there, snow began falling more heavily, covering the pier in white. Daniel looked out over the lake. "Do you know what Lily told me last night?" he asked quietly. "What?" "She said this year taught her what real family means." My heart tightened. "She said family isn't about living in the same house," he continued. "It's about choosing to protect each other." He turned back to me. "I should have protected you." I stepped forward and placed my hand on his cheek. "You can still choose differently," I said softly. And in that moment, I realized something deeply important. The greatest revenge is not taking something away. It's forcing people to confront who they became and giving them the chance to choose who they want to be instead. As we walked back toward the house together, I knew the final decision was approaching. Not about property, not about money, but about whether our family had truly learned the cost of disrespect and the value of dignity. The formal deadline arrived 2 days after Christmas, 30 days exactly. By law, at midnight, full ownership of the house would revert entirely to my personal trust. Daniel and Rachel would no longer have any legal claim. I spent that morning alone in the sunroom, watching the lake. The surface was frozen solid, now smooth and white, like a blank page waiting to be written on. That was exactly how my heart felt. Still, quiet, waiting. Around noon, I heard the front door open and close, softly. Footsteps moved down the hallway toward me, slower than usual. I already knew who it was. Rachel. When she stepped into the sunroom, she wasn't carrying her phone. She wasn't dressed for an argument. She looked like someone approaching a courtroom verdict. She stopped a few feet away from me and didn't sit down. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Then she did something I never expected. She lowered herself to her knees. The motion was so sudden, so raw, that I felt my breath catch. "Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't deserve forgiveness." The words were simple, unpolished, completely unguarded. For the first time since I had known her, Rachel Whitmore was not performing. She was exposed. "I spent years convincing myself you were an obstacle," she continued. "Someone I had to compete with to feel secure in my marriage." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you were never my enemy." Her voice broke. "I was my own." I said nothing, because this moment wasn't about my response. It was about her truth. "I humiliated you," she whispered. "I isolated you. I tried to rewrite reality so I wouldn't have to face my insecurity." Tears slipped down her face freely now. "And when you finally stood up for yourself, I called you cruel." She looked up at me then, not defensively, not angrily, but with something I had never seen before: humility. "I was wrong," she said simply. Silence filled the room. Outside, a single snowflake drifted past the window. I studied her carefully. This wasn't regret over losing the house. This was grief over losing who she thought she was. And that was the difference. "I'm not asking you to let us stay," she continued. "We're already packing. We've found a small apartment near Daniel's work." Her voice shook. "I just needed to say this before we leave, because you deserve to hear it." She lowered her head. "I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel invisible in your own home." The words hit deeper than any accusation ever could. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Rachel," I said quietly, "do you understand why what you did hurt so deeply?" She nodded immediately. "Yes, tell me." Her voice steadied slightly. "Because I didn't just disrespect you," she said. "I erased your identity, your history, your ownership. I treated you like something temporary in a life you built." Tears slipped down my own cheeks before I even realized they had begun. Because she understood, truly understood. And in that moment, the anger I had carried for years finally loosened its grip. That evening, I asked the entire family to gather in the living room. No one spoke as they entered. Daniel sat beside Rachel on the sofa, his arm resting protectively around her shoulders. Lily and Owen sat together on the rug, watching me with anxious eyes. They looked like people waiting for a verdict, and in a way, they were. I stood by the fireplace, feeling the warmth against my back, the familiar comfort of the home I had built decades ago. "I have listened." I began calmly to everything that has been said these past weeks. Rachel lowered her eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened. "And I have spent a great deal of time thinking," I continued, "about what justice truly means." The word justice echoed in the quiet room. For a long time I said I believed justice meant reclaiming what was mine. I paused, but now I understand. It also means ensuring the lesson is not wasted. Lily leaned forward slightly. Her breath held. I looked at Rachel. "You finally acknowledged the truth," I said softly. "Not just to me, but to yourself." She nodded, tears falling silently. "And Daniel," I continued, turning to my son, "you have admitted your failure to protect your family." He swallowed hard. "Yes." I took a deep breath. Then here is my decision. The room went completely still. The house will remain in my trust. Rachel's shoulders trembled, but she didn't protest. But I added, I am offering a conditional residency agreement. Daniel looked up stunned. Rachel blinked in disbelief. You may continue living here, I said, under 3 conditions. Hope flickered cautiously across their faces. First, I said, this will always be my home. My authority in this house will never again be questioned. Daniel nodded immediately. Second, I continued, respect will not be optional. If I am ever treated as less than a valued member of this family again, this agreement ends permanently. Rachel whispered, of course. And third, I said quietly, this house will belong equally in future inheritance to Lily and Owen, not solely to Daniel. Both children gasped softly, because they understood what that meant. Balance, protection, a safeguard against future exclusion. I looked at Rachel one final time. Do you accept these terms? She rose from the sofa slowly. Then she did something even more unexpected than before. She walked toward me and took my hands gently. Yes, she said through tears. I accept with gratitude. Her voice broke, and with a promise that I will spend the rest of my life earning the trust I lost. Daniel stood next his voice, thick with emotion. I will too. Lily suddenly burst into tears and ran to hug me tightly. Owen followed immediately, wrapping his arms around both of us. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their embrace, I felt something shift inside me completely. Not victory, not revenge, release. Because the greatest form of karma is not punishment, it is transformation. And as I looked around at my family wounded, humbled, but still together, I realized something with absolute certainty. Sometimes justice doesn't mean winning. It means rebuilding something stronger from what once fell apart. The months that followed were not easy. Reconciliation never is. It doesn't arrive like a miracle. It grows slowly, quietly, through small, daily choices. At first, the house felt fragile, like a place recovering from a storm. Every conversation carried a carefulness that hadn't existed before. Every interaction felt deliberate, measured, and that was exactly what healing required. Rachel began with actions, not words. She knocked before entering any room. She asked my opinion on household decisions. She returned Thomas's portrait to its rightful place above the fireplace without making an announcement. But the most meaningful change came in the smallest moments. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her standing at the stove, stirring a pot of chili. My recipe. She turned when she saw me nervous. I called Patty yesterday, she admitted softly. She helped me get the spices right. That simple act struck deeper than any grand apology ever could. Because it wasn't performative. It was personal. I thought, she continued hesitantly. Maybe we could cook together next time, if you'd like. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I nodded. I'd like that. That afternoon, Daniel joined me on the porch overlooking the lake. He had taken on a second project at work to help rebuild their financial stability. The stress showed in the lines around his eyes. But something else had changed too. He no longer looked away from difficult truths. I've been thinking about Dad a lot, he said quietly. So have I replied. He stared out at the water. I used to believe strength meant avoiding conflict, he admitted. But now, I see that real strength means protecting what matters, even when it's uncomfortable. I placed my hand over his. That's the lesson he would have wanted you to learn, I said gently. He nodded. I won't forget it again. Inside the house, the children adjusted in their own ways. Lily began spending more evenings with me in the sunroom, working on college applications, while asking questions about life, relationships, and resilience. One night, she looked up from her laptop and said something that stayed with me. Grandma this year taught me something important. What's that? I asked. That love isn't just about being close, she said thoughtfully. It's about being brave enough to protect each other, even when it's hard. Her words felt like a quiet echo of everything we had lived through. Owen, in his own quieter way, showed his understanding too. He started joining me in the garden, helping prune the roses and repair the wooden bench near the lake. One afternoon, as we worked side by side, he said softly, "I'm glad you didn't give up on us." I paused. "I never did," I said. He smiled. "I know, but you didn't give up on yourself either." For a 12-year-old, it was a remarkable observation, and it reminded me of something deeply important. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean abandoning love. It means protecting the conditions that allow love to survive. As winter slowly melted into spring, the house began to feel whole again. Not because the past had been erased, but because it had been acknowledged. And that made all the difference. Today, as I sit in the same sunroom overlooking Lake Evergreen, I am 70 years old. The lake is no longer frozen. Gentle waves ripple under the warm sunlight, reflecting a sky that feels impossibly wide and peaceful. Sometimes I still think about that Thanksgiving night, about the cardboard box, about the silence at the dinner table, about the moment I realized my own family had quietly excluded me from the life I built. That memory no longer fills me with pain. It fills me with clarity, because that night forced me to make the most important decision of my life. Not to fight for property, not to win an argument, but to reclaim my dignity. The house behind me is alive with familiar sounds. Rachel and Lily are laughing in the kitchen while preparing dinner. Daniel is fixing a loose railing on the porch. Owen is outside, trying to convince me to plant another row of roses, even though he knows I'll pretend to argue first. It is not a perfect family. No family ever is, but it is an honest one now. Rachel still carries guilt sometimes. I see it in the way she hesitates before asking my advice, as if she still fears she doesn't deserve forgiveness. And each time I remind her gently, trust isn't rebuilt through words, I tell her. It's rebuilt through consistency. She understands that now. Daniel, too, has changed in ways that run deeper than any apology. He no longer avoids conflict when something matters. He speaks up. He protects. He listens. And the children have grown into young people who understand something many adults never fully grasp. That respect is the foundation of every relationship. Not age, not authority, not convenience. Respect. Sometimes visitors ask me why I kept the cardboard box Rachel once used to pack my belongings. It sits quietly in the storage room upstairs. I never threw it away because it reminds me of something essential. The greatest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It is refusing to let their actions define your worth. It is standing firmly enough in your own truth that others are forced to confront theirs. And sometimes, if they are brave enough, it gives them the chance to change. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced betrayal, exclusion, or the painful realization that even family can lose their way, then I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to stand up for your dignity in a situation where staying silent would have been easier? Share your story in the comments. Your voice might help someone else find their strength. And if you believe in the power of justice, healing, and second chances, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us all of one simple truth. Respect is not a gift others give us. It is a boundary we choose to protect.